Well, it looks like this is probably everybody I guess we're gonna have for tonight. So I think we can go ahead and get started if that's okay. All right, so I'll call the executive DAC meeting to order. Our first order of business would be to approve our executive DAC meeting minutes from January 18th. And a little bit of a conundrum here, Dr. Cuban McCoy. Other than in terms of board members, I'm the only board member that is still on the board. Miss Justine Shaw and Chelsea Robinson are no longer on the executive committee, and none of the folks that are present here now that are new executive members were at the meeting. I guess technically I could step down as chair and have someone else be chair, and I could motion to approve the minutes, which I believe accurately. Oh, there's Chelsea. Yay. Maybe I can get Chelsea to do it. I'll try to figure out how to technically do this. Hi, Chelsea. Personally, I find it incongruent to ask you folks that were not present at a meeting to move to approve minutes of a meeting that you have no idea if they're accurate or not. So, Chelsea, I don't know, have you had an opportunity to review the minutes we were provided from the January 18th executive DAC meeting? Oh, she unmuted. I was hoping. We're having some technical difficulties here, it looks like. So why don't I skip over that and we'll move on, and I'll come back to that.
Oh, she said her sound was not working.
Oh, okay.
It just popped on. That's the first thing I heard.
Okay. All right. Chelsea, I was trying to see if, I don't know if you had an opportunity to review our meeting minutes from the executive DAC from January 18th, see if you could move to approve those, because you're the only other person that was here for the meeting that's a member.
I move to approve.
I'll informally step down and second that. Is anyone opposed to us approving our meeting minutes as presented from the January 18th, 2023 executive DAC meeting? Seeing none, it unanimously passes to approve the minutes. Our next order of business is to discuss the agenda for the DAC meeting on February 23rd. And I apologize if I missed it. I don't think I saw something proposed to us for that. So I don't know if
Okay, I'm new in this position, so my understanding was that it would be created right now. I do have a proposal. I'm going to pull that up right now. And
we have.
Can I jump in here?
Absolutely.
I had Christy work on a draft agenda, which should include a presentation from Dupree Bruno on the sunshine laws, as well as the student code of conduct. So those were two items I think I mentioned briefly at our last executive DAC meeting, that we wanted to bring the code of conduct back to DAC.
Right. And I don't think there were any issues with that. I think that was a well attended, and there was a lot of feedback last time on it, and those folks did a very good job of the staff members that presented did a very good job last year of coming with specific questions. They didn't even just come with what do you think. They actually had a list of questions they presented to DAC on specific issues, like parts of the dress code, whether or not there should be one code of conduct, or whether the code of conduct should be split by grade levels, and whether there should be 2 or 3. Those were some of the examples of the types of questions they asked, and they got some very specific feedback from us on that. So I think that was a really good presentation. So I hope that they come with that type of thing again and again. It's important to get out whatever they want to present, and I guess, draft code of conduct to everybody to look at, which provides them with much more meaningful feedback ahead of time, would be my comments. And yes, it was agreed that the school board attorney, Dupree Bruno, would do a presentation on the Sunshine Law at this meeting. We had skipped it at the last meeting to give more time for the proximity plan.
I have a quick question. Is there something specific that the code of conduct people already want to present? Any questions that are specific that they would like to present already?
Tammy has not shared that information yet. I believe she wanted to use the same format she did previously, which was go through the presentation and then present the questions. However, I can find out from her if she would like to share those specific questions ahead of time. And if that's the case, then we'll definitely get those out to DAC.
I think where I'm going with that is I'm just curious if there's major changes that will have substantial feedback to be given.
Understood the concern, and I don't want to misspeak, so let me clarify the extent of the feedback that's needed, and we will get that information to you.
Hey, may I jump in?
Absolutely.
I believe, Chelsea, I hear your concern, but I believe given where this group is and how this group has evolved to become so much more meaningful in terms of the feedback that they provide, I would love to urge the group beyond whatever specific items the staff wants us to look at, meaning you, the group, what the staff wants you guys to look at. I'd like to see you guys take a deep dive into that student code of conduct and provide feedback. We are in a time where parents' rights in education and parent involvement in education is paramount and super important. And I would love to hear your feedback in general beyond those specific issues. If you read through that code of conduct word by word and you see some things that jump off the page at you that are either excellent or really bad, and they are not a listed issue or item that staff wants to bring to your attention, I want to hear that as your board member. So that's my 2 cents on the student code of conduct.
Okay, I think if that's the request from the board through our board liaison, then it's even more important that the proposed code of conduct be sent out to the members as soon as possible so people have time to do that. This isn't a matter of looking at 15 or 20 slides. Then it's substantial for people to look through and solicit that feedback from their SACs if possible, which again is always the goal here. So I think it would be important to do that. I don't know if this is required, Dr. Cupid McCoy, but I will tell you, for several years now, the agendas we were presented provided specific time blocks for each of the line items, as opposed to a more, like, it's not necessary certainly for the executive DAC meetings. The type of agenda like the one that I don't know if you can see it, that Christine's put up on the screen, is perfectly fine. The way you're doing the agendas for the executive DAC is perfectly fine. Historically, the ones for the actual DAC meetings provided timeframes like 7 to 7:05, 7:05 to 7:15, so that people had an idea of how long each of these things were going to take. And I think we've moved a little bit away from that. I don't know if there was some requirement for that, or what people feel about that in terms of this proposed agenda.
May I respond?
Sure.
Okay. My feeling is this is your agenda. You can build it any way that you see fit. If you want timelines, that's perfectly fine. You just let me know what to put in there and I'll be happy to do it.
Okay. What do you folks think about, you're all used to seeing them? I mean, show of hands for me. I apologize that I don't know everybody that's been involved in DAC. How many of you were on DAC last year? Nobody. Okay. So Okay, well, Chelsea was, okay. Sorry. Christine, do you have access, easy access to put up one of like the previous agendas just so they can see what it looks like, so they kind of know what I'm talking about, and then we can get feedback? I don't know that I'm that partial to it either way, because I've always taken a little bit of liberty based on how things are going. I just keep an eye on it to make sure that we have sufficient time to do the breakouts and come back, which I also noticed this one doesn't mention the breakout groups. So I would assume the code of conduct would have breakout, because I think we get different feedback from certainly, elementary than you do from high school. And then I'm trying to recall, I think there were only two versions. Wasn't there essentially a lower grade version and then a middle/high school version? So, okay, everybody's nodding for me that I'm remembering it correctly. But certainly elementary, since it's my recollection, it's an actual different code. They're going to focus more on that than the high school code, I would think. Whereas versa middle and high will focus more on their code. So I think it's certainly important to have the breakout sessions.
The breakout sessions will always be a given for the DAC meetings. So we'll just make sure that when we provide the draft agenda moving forward, that it reflects that. And in terms of the specific time frames, we will do what's the will of the group. The challenge sometimes becomes dependent on the flow of the conversation. You either have to cut it short, so you can move on to the next item on the agenda. So I'm not sure how the group wants to proceed, but again, we will conform to whatever your desire is.
Dr. Kumiko, I agree with you wholeheartedly, and I sort of was implying that by saying I tended to treat the timeline as a guideline. You saw me do it at the proximity. If questions are going and we're getting good feedback back and forth, I'm loath to interrupt it until we get to the point where I'm like, okay, we got to stop so we can have enough time for the next item. I'm not opposed to it. I would just, if you could check with Attorney Dupree Bruno to make sure that there's not some requirement that we're not aware of. Me personally, I'm okay without them, without the time frames, as long as that's not anything. But I do think we need we're supposed to always have, and we're also always required to have that public comment, the non-DAC members on agenda items. And it's always important, I think, to put that time limit in there so that you don't have someone show up. Now, it's been very, very rare in the last several years. I think once we had a non-DAC member give public comment. So it's very rare, but I think it's important to make sure we put that on the agenda. And I think that does come from the attorney's advice. So if, in my opinion, I'll share with everyone, if the board attorney doesn't require us to have the timeline, I'm okay with it. How does everybody else feel?
I think the timeline is somewhat helpful, though, as a parent, just for me to get an idea of how in depth a topic is going to be discussed. I agree that you don't have to follow it exactly, like use it as a guideline, but as a parent, especially if it's a topic that I don't know much about, knowing how in depth or how long is going to be potentially spent on it, or if parents have other commitments, maybe they need to go help with dinner or help a child with homework, letting them know about what time the meeting is going to get back to something is maybe helpful.
Okay. Anybody else?
I agree with Katie on that. It's extremely helpful just to, have a head in the game. Like today we got the code of conduct. I got it in my email at 10:30 and I was working and I opened it up really quickly to see if I could scan it, but it was 104 pages. So I didn't know if we were actually talking about it today, and I knew I'd be completely unprepared. So at least if I know ahead of time what we're going to talk about, at least I can have some idea, or if part of my responsibility is to shoot ideas around at school when I go to the SAC meeting on the 23rd, then that's helpful too, to throw that out and see if I can get any feedback to return to this meeting here.
Right.
I apologize. I forgot to say that the rename feature is not available. So this is Katie's actually my daughter's name.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. I'm Jessica.
Hi, Jessica.
I meant to put it in the chat and then I forgot. So
Okay.
I just turned it on for you.
thank
you. All right. Does anybody else have comments on that issue? I usually do this by consensus unless something, Chelsea, you're going to say something?
I was just going to say that I think that's really good feedback.
You cut out, Chelsea. Give me if you like the timeline, give me a thumbs up. Okay. So I generally do this by consensus unless there seems to be some contention. So it seems that the will of the board is that we should use the timeline and we should stick with the format like Christine just put up on the screen for us. So code of conduct, we have typically, for the most part, we kind of defer to staff to try to give us some of those timelines, because you can talk to like Attorney Dupree Bruno to figure out how long her part is, and we get a feel for the breakout groups. And then I, have exercised some chairperson discretion based on how it's going, but we do our best to stick to that. So I don't think there's any issues with doing the code of conduct based on what's been presenting. You heard the comments from Chelsea that we want to make sure we understand, but with the board comments of they'd like the feedback on that, I think that's important. Does the other question I have is, does the version we're getting of the code, does it show you the changes from last year? Or is it just, this is the new version?
Whatever the link is to the website, and I don't know if it shows the changes or not. I think it just shows the current.
I didn't see where changes were highlighted or anything. It just looks like it's ready for publication.
So, Barbara Patricia, have you seen any document that shows?
No, I have not. It's so funny. It must be a JD doctor thing, because I am constantly asking for redlined versions of documents. In one way this works for me though, because if I am asking for a deep dive full reading, then your mind is not automatically going to go to those redlined items. I think that typically they don't, we talked about this last meeting, Chair Hertz, they're not going to give you the redline version before the board sees it. That's the problem. The changes have to go to the board first. So what I would ask Dr. Cupid McCoy to do is, if there's a way that you can find out the areas that staff is looking at to change, and send a list of those items to the DAC, to the full membership of DAC, so that they can be more prepared on those items, but still prepared on everything. Is that a fair request?
It is. Consider it done.
Thank you. Is that an okay sort of middle ground?
Yes, ma'am.
Great.
Though I'd suggest if they've put out the draft, I guess, to members in the school of the new code. I assume what you folks are saying, what you saw today was the new code of conduct. Is that what you're saying? Or you saw it was last year's code of conduct resent out? Okay, it was last year's. Okay. But respectfully, if they're going to share with, I'm assuming what they're showing us is the new code of conduct. Otherwise, I don't understand. Are they showing us last year's code of conduct with no changes? Now I'm perplexed at what we're being asked to do.
Well, it's dated 2022, 2023 school year, if that helps a little bit. Other than that, I couldn't answer.
I mean, the link's just to the public website. You could get to the same site going with the normal navigation. So it doesn't seem like it's a draft for review. It looks like the published version.
Okay. So that, I guess I'd be curious. I mean, if that's what you want us to do, if you want us to re-review the same thing we looked at last year, I guess we can, but I think that goes more to Chelsea's point of what are we being asked to do if there's not some change or update or something? What are we being asked to do? So I would question that as well.
May I interject?
Sure.
And my thoughts are that the student services group will share with us, you know, there've been changes in particular areas, and here are areas within the code that we have concerns. As Board Member Patrica mentioned earlier, is an example could be, do we need to look at this through a different lens based on the Parent Bill of Rights? What I don't want to do right now is say specifically what they're going to ask, but I hear the concerns, and I will make this commitment that by close of business tomorrow, I will have Ms. Rude get some specifics out to Executive DAC so you can see where they're going.
Okay. Is everybody general thumbs up? Everybody okay with that? All right. Looks like we got a consensus there that works for your Executive DAC. So I think that kind of addresses our issues for the agenda on February 23rd. We're going to use the timeline format similar to what Christine put up on the screen. We'll rely on staff to adjust those blocks as necessary based on Attorney Dupree's presentation on sunshine law, reasonable time for the code of conduct folks, as well as the information as to what areas they'd like us to focus on, in addition to the request from Board Member Patrica that we look at the whole thing, but we'd like to know what changes there are. I think that takes us to board member highlights.
Thank you. I don't really have anything to highlight other than we will be voting on the student enrollment plan tomorrow night. And I'm happy with the feedback that I received. I am going to be just frank and honest and tell you I was really surprised that there wasn't more sort of pushback. This is a huge change. And typically whenever across the country, when you redraw the boundaries for attendance at a school, you typically have full boardrooms. I think the unfettered or unlimited grandfathering has helped to make that easier. Chelsea, as a matter of fact, I think I heard you address that specifically in the breakout group. And that is an idea that came directly, not the idea of unlimited grandfathering, but grandfathering being a huge issue was born in this group. So just so that you know how important the feedback is that you provide, literally the change that made this plan acceptable to a lot of people came from you guys. So if you could just keep that lens as you go through the rest of the school year, and as you're looking at that code of conduct, and as you're looking at other items we're asking for feedback, understand that your feedback really, really does make a difference. That's my highlight for today. Does anybody have any questions for me? No? Okay.
Can I just add a little bit for proximity plan? I've been meeting with all the moms and the moms groups on Facebook, just kind of disseminating information, and it is being very well received so far. So to kind of validate that feedback.
Yeah, Chelsea, you are hardcore in terms of your willingness and ability to get out there and spread the word in these moms groups. I'm in one of those moms groups, and I saw you responding, which is something that I would normally do on a very controversial topic, but you had already responded, and everything you responded was absolutely accurate. So you go, girl. Well, keep it up.
You just made my day. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. And for the folks that are here representing high school, I was in the high school group, and I told everybody that often these meetings don't go the full hour. So we're at 5:55, and unless anybody has anything for the good of the order that they'd like to say. Now, the only other thing I would say, Dr. Coop and McCoy, one thing that's helpful is when we can is to try to talk at least 2 topics out. So you're less jammed up with your staff, and you don't get as much pushback from us on the topics. So I know it's been tough with the storm, and we're starting off awful late in the year with our first meetings, but just a thought, I'm not trying to put you on the spot for the March 29th meeting, but to the degree that we can start to talk about that in advance, I think that's helpful to both sides, and then you get some of our feedback and you have more time to do stuff, so you don't have to promise us stuff by the end of the next business day. I'll leave that as a comment. And I don't know if you want to respond.
I do. I'm I'm thinking, and I don't know if good of the order is a place for it, but since you've given me the floor, I'm going to take a little bit of creative liberty here. So a part of what a small group is currently working on is trying to develop what we call the profile of a graduate, right? We are working with the Carnegie Foundation, which is why I'm actually in Phoenix now, attending this seminar. So one of the things that we're thinking about is engaging different stakeholders to get your input about when a student leaves the school district of Lee County, what are we expecting him or her to be able to accomplish? So I want to get feedback, not just from DAC, but from the business community, from parents, from students. And I really want your thoughts around what's the best way to approach that. Now, we'll come with some guiding questions, but if you don't think this is an appropriate forum to do that, then I will try to engage you in a different manner.
Does anybody have any comments on that? I mean, I think that's a potentially great topic to bring to DAC. That's exactly what we're here for. When you have topics that you're looking for that type of feedback on, I think you can structure that. I think you might get a little bit of pushback from the question of the elementary and middle school folks will be like, it's kind of far in the future for us, but yet the purpose is Miss Patrica was about to tell us, the purpose of educating every child is to see that they graduate. So I think it's applicable to elementary school students and middle school students as well. But I think that could be a great potential topic.
And Chair Hertz, if I may, I was going to ask whether we could dovetail that with what I asked for last meeting, which is feedback from parents regarding how to best engage them when it comes time for their child to graduate. Those next steps, how to get the bright futures, how to best communicate those steps, because you're absolutely right, Chair Hertz, when we're talking about, and Dr. Cupid-McCoy, please correct me if I'm wrong, but when we're talking about a profile of a graduate, it starts pre-K. And one of the problems that we face with the public when we make changes in early childhood education or in those early years, you don't see the payoff and the results until they're up in high school. But how those changes impact you on the ground when you're bringing your kid to school every day and they're coming home with or without homework or whatever the example is, has a true impact on you in your daily life and the potential success of your child. So I see impact K-12, pre-K-12, and I see an opportunity for feedback. I don't know that my graduation feedback is enough for a whole meeting, but I see the two as being close enough that we might be able to get feedback on both. Am I making sense?
You are, and actually that is where I'd like the group to go, because the walking across the stage is sort of the end product, but that is not where it begins. So we have to think about when a student starts with us in pre-K, or even if that student were to join us in 5th grade, what is that onboarding like? What is the expectation? What must we ensure that he or she leaves that particular grade level with in order to continue to excel? And, it's about the whole child. We've had some conversations through our adult ed representative with the business community, and they're looking for certain skill sets. But if we don't have a really global picture of what's needed, we could inadvertently misdirect, if you will, students due to no fault of their own or to our own, but it's not a singular effort. And part of what I would like to see change is the way we think about graduation, in that it's currently a high school exercise, but it's so much more than that. And I'm hoping that this process will get us to see that it really starts with us from pre-K through 12th grade.
I just wanted to add, I'm a high school teacher, but I also have a elementary, a middle, and a high school student. I've got all of them. And that is one of the things that I see, like I even hear my middle schooler talking about the things that are going to happen in high school, but I know that that is not a common conversation. And it's because I'm a teacher. And even my, and especially when you're talking about scholarships or even what happens after graduation. And I get a lot of ninth graders that come in and they don't understand even that what they're doing in ninth grade affects whether or not they graduate. And so I think having this group discuss the whole profile and having elementary school parents discuss it would be very helpful to kind of fostering that, okay, this is not something that's done in a day or a year. Like you said, it's ongoing and it starts early.
No, I think that's great. I know one of my children lost somewhere between 40 to 50 hours of service time because they didn't understand how to be pre-approved. And the counselor said, doesn't matter that you did it and that you have the letter and everything else. It wasn't pre-approved, so none of this counts. Even though they did it for the express purpose of, and it's fine. So my son has many more hours than he would have needed and more extra stuff to put on the resume and all that kind of fun stuff. But it's the kind of thing that, here it is, my kid, and I think I'm fairly involved as a parent, and I try to keep this up and try to find that balance of having my child be responsible for their own decisions, and just swore he had no clue, had no idea. And I'm like, you need to take it to the council, blah, blah, blah. And shows with the council says, oh, this is all wonderful. And I would have approved it, but because it wasn't pre-approved, you can't use it. And I was like, seriously? So when you talk about these things, I think it's important that they start talking to the kids about it in middle school, because you got to tell people and then tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them, and then tell them again, especially when they're kids, right? So I think that's all good stuff. And by all the reactions, I think Board Member Patrica and Dr. Cuban-McCoy, that's a wonderful topic. And if you think it's timely for March 29th, let's start focusing on that.
I just want to add, in addition to that, I just wanted to add, sorry about that. In addition, for elementary, since I help represent that, I think that we could find enough to talk about in our breakout sessions to contribute. So I'm perfectly good with our population taking a look at everything.
Go ahead, Dr. Cuban-McCoy.
So what I will do in addition to that is bring 3 additional topic ideas. That way, Executive DAC will have some additional thoughts around, okay, here's what we want to do. And this month, we'll push this off, or whatever the thinking of the group is. But I agree, it needs to be more than day to day. So you need to have a menu of options to choose from.
All right. And now I'll tell everybody the last one. These particular minutes of the DAC meeting that Christine provided us, I don't think it applies as much in that we weren't, sometimes what happens is we ask questions and get answers. I will point out that there are a number of questions asked and there are no answers. Historically, part of the goal here was for staff to provide answers to the feedback. There are an awful lot of questions. I don't know if you want to take a look at that, Dr. Cuban-McCoy, and think about that. But part of the reason why Executive DAC was previewing, if you will, the DAC meeting minutes was you had the folks in the breakout session who were sort of capturing this information, trying to make sure that it gets actually accurately captured into the minutes. And then when it's more limited, we were getting question by question response. I realize there's an awful lot of questions, and I'm not trying to have an unreasonable demand, but I would encourage staff to look at the questions that were in these minutes and think about whether it's appropriate to provide responses to those to present back to DAC. To give DAC back their minutes with a whole bunch of unanswered questions doesn't complete the feedback loop, in my opinion, and that's not the synergistic goal we're trying to create. At least that's my opinion. I don't know if anyone else has a different thought on that.
No, you're right. There's no way around that. You just no other thoughts needed, Chair Hurts.
Okay.
You're correct.
I keep wondering why you guys keep asking me to do this when all I do is I feel like I make your jobs harder, but you guys keep asking me to do this year after year, so here I am doing it.
No, and that's well, as the newcomer, I actually appreciate your feedback, right? Because I am now in a position, I believe, to one, have the agenda be structured correctly and the response. Now, if we get to another meeting and you're still having to provide some guidance to me with what this structure should look like, then call me offline and just,
fair enough,
issue the punishment offline. But I appreciate this because I am understanding how the process flowed in the past and should flow moving forward. And I'll just leave it at that.
Sure, and I'll apologize that I've had a packed calendar and I looked at all of this shortly before jumping on here, so I didn't have feedback to give before I came here.
If I could just say for a moment, as far as the questions, when I did the minutes for the DAC meeting, there were breakout rooms, and I wasn't lucky enough to be in a breakout room because I had to stay in the main room. And I got wonderful notes from elementary and middle, but I did not receive the high school notes yet. So that's why you see so many questions under the high school level.
Okay. And I'm not sure if there were notes for the high school besides the jam board. I think that's really all there was from high school, having been present in the high school. And Dr. Cuban McCoy and Clayton can maybe discuss that as well to make sure we're all on the same page. And now we have our folks. We had a bunch of new folks in high school that had never done it all before. So now everybody's had an opportunity to kind of see what goes on and understand the results. So I think this is all a learning and growing process for all of us. And I do see that in like, for example, under, I do see some responses from like Miss Linda Mayer, Mr. Taylor, that you do have responses to some of them in the minutes. I just thought it was something worth mentioning. All right. Does anybody else have anything for the good of the order tonight?
Can I just say too, sorry, Scott, sure. I know we have a whole board of a lot of people who may be doing this for the first time. And I want to say that my favorite thing about doing this is that we do see actionable change from our committee. And it's very rewarding to be able to see the impact that we can have. And so I want to thank all of you guys too who stepped up to help us on this, because it really does take a village. And just like you will probably hear me, I think I said at the last meeting too, what can we contribute to this? And that comes from Scott, because you have always been, well, how are we contributing? How are we making change? And I think that's really important to keep as the forefront of our committee, because we do that. We do have change.
I agree wholeheartedly. I didn't do as much of it. And normally part of our opening in like the first meeting, or when I do that, what is DAC? I give this, I give a bigger version of what I mentioned about truly when I first came to DAC, they would show up, the staff, and none of the people present are those staff people. But they would simply show up with this short slide presentation and say, okay, thanks for coming to DAC. Here's some information we want to give you. Thank you very much for coming. Have a great night. And I'm like, why am I doing this? Miss Patrika and I were in the, believe it or not, at the time it was the elementary school breakout group together. That's how I started. The principal of my son's school asked me to do this when my son was in kindergarten. So I've been doing this ever since. When he went on to middle school, I got passed on, and then I got passed on to high school. So I've been doing this for 12 years now. And it's a huge change from it was strictly one way. You didn't see the presentation before you showed up. They showed it to you, and then they sort of sometimes asked for questions. Many times they didn't even ask for questions. They just presented it and said, "Thank you for coming." And I'm like, literally, what am I doing here? And why do you call this the advisory council when you don't even solicit our feedback? Like, what are we doing here? So I think it's hugely different now. And there's a whole list. In fact, one thing, Dr. Cuban McCoy, you may want to do before Dr. Spiro gets away from you is, I think he had sort of a running list going of actionable changes that occurred. I know I mentioned, like, there were best practices for Google Classrooms. Is one that sticks in my head. There were significant changes made to the quality points presentation. If I'm remembering the name correctly, Miss Patrika can correct me. When we changed from the straight grades breakdown to, I think I'm using the right term, right? One of you, Jessica, quality points, right? The change in the grading for high school students.
That is correct. Yep,
okay.
That's correct.
And there were significant changes in how that was presented, from before DAC to after DAC. Those are just two I can think of. I know that Dr. Sparrow kind of had a running list. That might be a great thing for you to get and try to keep going, so that next year in the future, as some of us start to drop off, because I am not going to do this forever, you'll have that list to keep encouraging new people to give you that kind of feedback, because that's why I do it. I mean, because I see the benefit and that the time's worthwhile. That's why I'm still doing it. So I think that's great that Chelsea spoke up and said that. And I can think of those two things off the top of my head. But I know Dr. Sparrow had a list, and that might be useful to keep around, to keep adding to.
That should be the first slide at orientation every year.
I agree with you. We should add that. In fact, I'd be willing to help add that before I go. If we can get the list, I'd be happy to remake the slide and add that. I'd usually talk about it more, and we were so worried about the proximity plan taking a lot of time. I did as short of a presentation as I could, and we seem to have a lot more new members this year. So it's certainly something I'm pretty free with adjusting stuff. I might talk a little bit about it at the beginning of next meeting. And I can get with Dr. Cuban McCoy offline to see if we can put together a little list of top 5 or so, like changes or improvements that have come as a result of DAC. I'm drawing a blank on more than the ones I mentioned at the moment.
I held a Zoom with Dr. Malloy about proximity plan, and he mentioned, or maybe he even did it in the DAC, that a lot of the policy around proximity plan came from DAC in our first round of conversations a year plus ago. And that's something that DAC can point to. Like, we helped create policy. That's amazing.
And I agree. And that's what encourages, that's kind of encouragement our folks need to understand, that it's worthwhile to read the whole code of conduct and give feedback, because you have people like board member Patrica, they'll then go to the board meeting and say, DAC made these recommendations, and I move that we change the code of conduct to include these items. And she has absolutely done that. And so have other board members have made motions that directly came from recommendations from this group. So I think it's that constant reinforcement to show people their voices are heard that makes it them be willing to invest the time to do that, because it doesn't just happen, right? We all have to invest time to give that kind of meaningful feedback. Does anybody else have anything? One of you can make a motion to adjourn.
I'll motion.
Out of the chair.
I'll motion if somebody can second me.
I'll second.
All right. All those opposed? Seeing no one opposed, we'll stand in adjournment. I'll see everybody at the, I closed it. What was it? February 28th, 26th? I got the date wrong now. I closed it. 23rd. February 23rd DAC meeting. I'll see everybody then. I should have closed the agenda before we were done. All right, everybody have a great night. Thank you.
Have a great night, everybody. Thank you.